All right. Welcome to Videogame Sommelier. Cheers, everybody. Hello, hello.
Hello.
Hey, great to see you guys. Tonight we are wrapping up our conversation on Hyperlight Drifter, our last live stream of the year. And you gentlemen are looking very dapper in your themed sweaters. So we have to kind of do a fashion show. I'm doing the Star Wars Stormtrooper thing because it's the best. Jimmy, very nice.
I'm sporting the Chinese-made Leo meme, which, by the way, is identical on the back.
Okay.
It took me 5 weeks to get this in the mail.
Worth every single one of those hours.
That is
And
dedication,
many
Jimmy.
emails of frustration of where is it.
That's how
And
you
it's
should do
here.
the whole show, just half
Right.
facing us.
So if you see me, you'll still feel comfortable.
and then Rye, I see that you're a cotton-headed Nitty Muggins,
That's me. Yep.
and it's
Sporting
made
my
of
elf.
100% cotton.
Yeah, dude.
Headed Nitty Muggins.
Narwhals.
Classic and
included.
awesome.
Narwhals and Buddy the Elf. But yeah, it's our last show of 2020.
believe
It's
it, man.
the
I can't believe it.
holiday season. Merry Christmas a couple weeks early.
Cheers, everybody. Merry Christmas.
Cheers. Merry
I-
Christmas.
How are we already here? I mean, granted, we did start in the fall, but nonetheless, it goes like that.
Right. I was going to say 2020 has felt long. Many years kind of go by quickly for me. This was
It
not
is-
one of those.
This is a weird year where it felt so long and like weirdly quick, kind of simultaneously.
Oh.
It's sort of one of those like mind-boggling. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
nuts. Ready to
Yeah.
punt it in the past, though. Let's move forward. Brighter year ahead.
Punt.
I'm on board. So yeah, at the end of our episode tonight, we should kind of just talk a little bit about 2021 and give some ideas of things we're thinking about, maybe some games, Ryan, that the sommelier has kind of already earmarked for 2021. Yeah, and just anything else you guys want to talk about what we want to keep doing with this channel. But this will be our 6th video, so yeah, our 3rd completed game here. And I'm excited to be wrapping up the year and starting a new one with you guys. This is a really fun project, and with all of you who are watching now and watching in the future. But hey, Hyperlight Drifter, we beat it. We
Barely.
You
finished it.
guys did. You both beat it. I beat it too.
Yeah. And I should acknowledge that this is the 2nd Wednesday of the month instead of the 3rd Wednesday. You gentlemen were kind enough to flex our schedules, and we're going just a little bit early. But it will be on by the 3rd Wednesday, as Ryan pointed out. So it all works out.
Yeah.
But thank you guys for beating it quick, because we only had 1 week between shows instead of the normal 2 weeks that we have.
In all fairness, we did go through 3/4 of it before our last video. And in
You're
the
right.
final quarter, which is a loaded quarter, it was plenty of time to do it.
Yeah.
But it still threw me several curveballs. This game sort of kicked me in the butt several times.
Yeah.
I have a sore butt right now. Not because my chair.
Exploded the floor right out from under me.
There you go.
Yeah. Yeah.
So where do we even start on this? Should we start with talking about the South region?
Yeah, let's go south.
Cool.
So the moment that stands out to me in the South, because the South is where we meet the robotic heart of this region, this kind of like kingdom that lives on the earth, this post-apocalyptic domain. But we find out that all of these creatures have been created in these laboratories underground, and they are literally being grown in vats
Yeah.
And many of those vats have burst and the creatures are running amok. And we learn the origin of those little almost Goomba looking goblins that have been seen all over in North.
In every region.
Yep. In every region. Were grown in that lab in the underground regions of South. But the image that most strikes me in that region, and is really kind of one I always come back to for this game, is I think it's when you get your first like pink triangle core thing, and you get it at the foot of this like giant mechanical heart. And it's an enormous like installation in this room, and in the background you see one of those titans kind of decaying on the ground in the distance. And oh wow, that heart was meant for something that big. And knowing the developer's story, I can't separate the fact that mechanical hearts is kind of where this game, I think, sinks its teeth into the themes. What does it mean to be creating mechanical hearts? They seem like they should be a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And instead we have these little flubber creatures jumping around, kicking our butts.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's one thing that struck me is, I'm sure this is done purposefully, and in the style of most games, when you beat dungeons and places, you go into a dungeon. But one of the themes I felt like I noticed is anytime you're beating a boss in any of the regions, you're traveling into a cave, you're traveling underground, and when you get to the south and you do this, you travel far underground. There is a long, dark staircase that you are traveling down. And in the process, you're getting like these little screen flashes of the very creature that you've been like haunted by this whole game. And so as you're exploring these things and making these discoveries, it's a dark place. It doesn't feel like it's coming from, it's hard to know like what the intent maybe necessarily was. How'd the heart get there? What was the heart's purpose? But as you're going further and further, none of it feels good. It just feels like you're, no pun intended, reaching the heart of the matter. So along the way, you're making more and more twisted discoveries. All these bats, it actually reminded me of Independence Day. When you see like, aliens all hung in the, the creatures, but it felt like that in many cases. You just have these like twisted creatures that are under there. And so that's a good question, because certainly the developer's background with his heart condition it's pervasive throughout the whole game. I mean, you can find themes and nuggets of that in everything we do. And that was a very interesting discovery, to find that giant mechanical heart. What was he trying to say with that? What was he trying to get for us to take away?
Yeah.
Finding that.
And I think one of the things that I kind of just have to accept in one sense, but then I get to, love and relish in the other sense, is since the story was told so visually and without a lot of specific content and details and, no words, there are some elements that can be interpreted in different ways and that are vague by design. And so I think you were hitting it right on the head, Jimmy, where it's like, whatever's happening, it's not good. So, how I was interpreting that, because there's a similar room that I think you walked through earlier where there are two eyeballs that are moving around and, kind of scaled the same. So I am assuming that it's not just that they built a heart, but that these are pieces of a large creature.
Exactly.
Yeah, and when you see the Titan in the background, I'm assuming they're just harvesting parts of this thing to make everything else. So there's something about, the power of those machine beings that they're using to fuel this factory to make other beings. But the color scheme and just the Frankenstein feeling nature of it tells you what you said, Jimmy. This isn't good. You
Yeah.
know, with knowing a little bit about the developer's background of having a heart condition that he's dealt with, you'd think that seeing a giant, strong, beating heart, be
you'd
it
think it'd be
part
alluring.
machine, it would only be good, right? And so it's weird that there's a version of that that's bad, and I still don't know entirely what to think about that.
Well, what we can look at is the drifter himself, right? Who suffers some kind of condition, and that's terminal. He's coughing up blood, and he's clutching his heart. He's putting medicine directly in his heart, and this tells me that when the drifter stands in front of the heart and is intent on destroying it, right, and everything it stands for, you know that this isn't really about finding a cure for his condition. This is about solving a larger problem with the world. Consequences be damned.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know a whole lot about the condition the developer has with his heart, but the thought that I had with it is it's one of those ironic things where the heart is the very thing that keeps us alive. And yet in his case, it's also the condition that might kill him. You know what I mean? It's affecting the very thing, the very organ that's keeping him alive is also problematic to a point where it may take him out,
right?
Which is horrible. And
yeah.
so you look at this big, strong heart, and it's like a messed up purpose. And so you look at this and think, oh, this should be a good thing, but it's probably the very core of what's causing the badness here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just even thinking, if you had a heart condition, there are so many sayings and visuals that revolve around hearts as good things. You just think to Valentine's Day. He probably experiences the visuals of Valentine's Day differently than any of us. Home is where the heart is. I love you with all my heart. There's just so many heart sayings that would be inverted and altered because of that. So I feel like he took us on a journey to where we could see, a beating heart, and know pretty quickly this isn't a good thing.
So he, the drifter fights several mini bosses, which are kind of a new thing in this region of the game. And it doesn't really culminate in a single giant bad, but you kind of defeat all these little ones, because I think the final boss at the heart of the city that is deep underground is more or less the final boss of South, right? It's like all the thunder is being saved for that big finale, and it sits right on the other side of South. It requires no more, tracking through mazes or finding, keys to things. You just go straight to the finale once you go down that core, and you're treated to some new music, and you're treated to this like vast and strange underground kind of cutscene, more or less, as you continue going down. And I remember playing this the first time and feeling this sense of culmination and this ominous feeling as we're approaching the core to all these visions and dreams. And then you walk into that final chamber, and thankfully it gives you a lot of health upgrades right before you do, right?
Right. But that also gave me a sense of like, do I even want to walk through this door? Like, I'm just going to take the health and skedaddle.
I'll go back up. Yeah.
Oh man.
And then you get to this final door that has like a diamond shape in it. And this has been a key shape in the game.
Yeah.
The diamond has been the shape of the city, north, south, east, west. The diamond has been the shape of these collectible power triangles. And then the diamond is the white diamond is this object.
Halo.
you know, it's like the MacGuffin of the game. It's the thing that you're always reaching for, and the black, you know, corruption creature keeps pulling you back. And it's finally revealed in this end, but it's really interesting because it looks like it should be the salvation. It's a white diamond.
Right.
It's beautiful, right? It's the thing that your character is reaching for, like his salvation. And yet, you know, going into this, that this is where the corruption is finally going to capture you. And sure enough, it spawns like right out of it. And this is probably the most vague and visually rich part of the game, but it gives us no argument. It gives us nothing but the visuals themselves to make sense of. I'm curious what you guys' take is of this final encounter.
So, in general, it was very satisfying. Jimmy and I were talking about how I think that final boss was pretty similar in challenge level to West, and so we were kind of a little relieved. But he had some fun dynamics, and you know, it was a really fun battle, and it felt good to beat him.
It was. That's a really fun way to actually approach it, though, because I hadn't really thought about it that way. It was not like the West boss was just so frustrating to me because it was just so hard. And granted, I was probably a little underprepared. I didn't have upgrades I should have had. But I learned it. I learned my way around it and figured it out. And in lieu of that, you learn what to do for the next boss, right? Everything you do makes you stronger and more equipped to approach it. But the battle itself, you're right, it was dynamic. Even though the moves he does are slightly repetitive, they're very different. You feel like you have to shift strategies quickly and be prepared to do that fast. But it was fun. It really was a fun battle.
Yeah,
and
it's a great battle.
And the character itself. Oh, go ahead, Justin.
I was just gonna say, I thought for a while that I had found out some of the characters' names, because apparently there are Steam trading cards.
Yes.
And two examples are the final boss. His name was Judgment, and the drifter you play as throughout the game, his name was the Magician. And I was like, this is so cool. Like, I'm going into all this. And then as I was reading about this, I found out that all of those playing cards are all named after tarot cards. And so it was just another interesting, like, abstraction, right?
Yeah.
And just another interesting vagueness where it's kind of like, here's an archetype, and here's more or less where these characters fit in. So it helped me kind of get a sense for what was going on a little more. I'm not familiar with like the specifics of tarot cards, so it didn't help me that much. But I was getting so used to calling that final guy Judgment, and so in some way, the game wants us to equate him with the idea of judgment, but that's not necessarily his name, and that was just interesting to me.
He manifests himself in the most like visceral thought I had as I fought him was he represents to me what I would picture cancer to be like.
Yeah.
He fires this like blast of crap at you, but then even like some of his moves, he has these like black like strings that shoot out. I don't know. It just feels like a web of like, maybe a better way to picture it is the symbiote in the Spider-Man movies.
Yeah, exactly. Like Venom.
Web. Yes, exactly. Couldn't think of Venom's name. It reminded me a lot of that. And so it just feels like this sticky, evil, black, I don't know, terror piece to it. When you finally defeat him, there is a lot of satisfaction to it. But in terms of fighting him, I just got the sense that I'm fighting something that's not just like, oh, I'm a bad guy. All the other bosses you face are, they have their little quirks. This feels like you're just fighting evil. You're fighting a sickness.
Yeah.
And so
Sickness itself.
it really feels like you're fighting something larger than just like a strong bad character. You're fighting an entity or something that's like underlying just bad.
And one of the ways that I was kind of thinking about that idea, Jimmy, was like all the other bosses had kind of been corrupted in one way or
Yeah.
another. And I
Yeah.
feel like I'm fighting the corruption. I feel like
Mhm.
I'm fighting the force that corrupted them.
Yeah.
And
Or
so
the essence of corruption. Yeah.
right. And so one of the visuals that was most striking to me at the end of the game that I'm still trying to parse out is, you know, you do your cool sword flick and stab into the guy, which you had never done into a character before. You'd only done that into the ground. And I was like, yeah. And then it kind of smash cuts into you stabbing the big diamond, the big pink diamond.
Mhm.
And so it seems that that last boss, I think he's real. Like, I think you were fighting something real, and it seems also that he's kind of a manifestation of a different reality. And, you know, I do think when you did that swirl swirl stab, you were stabbing the boss Judgment, but you were also stabbing that purple pink diamond that you've been searching for this entire time. And that ended up being your quest, where I would have thought, um, leading up to it, that that was the thing you were like trying to acquire, not
Mhm.
necessarily destroy. And
Yeah.
so that set kind of the rest of the story upside down for me. So I kind of had to like
Ah.
go backwards and think about, okay, so what did that mean? You know, and why would that have been bad and all of
Yeah.
that? But so that was a very striking visual to me, that the thing I thought I was trying to get maybe to save and cure the drifter was the thing that I chose to destroy at the end, or if it was a hallucination, you know, needed to destroy in order to beat the cancerous villain.
Isn't it funny when they give you a twist like that? Because I felt the same way. I was like, oh, wait. Okay, it's gone. We'll blow that up. You know what I mean? It felt it was a nice little turn to it that I really wasn't expecting, because you are chasing that throughout this game. So to destroy it felt like, oh wow, okay.
There's an image that runs through this scene, through the entire game, actually, but you really get to know it in South. And that's those big pipes that run through the facilities underground and pump into various, elements. And they're carrying this pink fluid, right?
Yeah.
And it's neon pink, it's really garish, or it's magenta, right? And this is like some kind of artificial blood that is in the robots or is powering them. It's and what's so curious about that color is it's the same color as
You
the coughing up that the drifter does. It's
Ugh.
not a natural shade of red, but it's a very garish magenta color.
Mm.
And so that is pouring out of the white diamond at the very end when you stab it, and it's clearly, the source of it, the thing circulating it. It's like the heart of
Mm.
of all of this machinery. So it
Mm.
doesn't take the shape of a human heart necessarily, but it takes more of that abstracted heart shape. And it's very reminiscent of, say, the Zelda Triforce, kind of the key, the abstracted key of power. And your character's quest, has not been to acquire it, but to destroy it.
Right.
And the very fact that of that smash cut, Justin, leads me to believe that this whole issue with the black corruption, which I believe you first see reflected in the water in that opening cutscene, and then it like rises out and you slash at it, but it, it's faster than you.
Yep.
I think it just represents some kind of temptation related to the cell. The very fact that you think you're there to acquire it is perhaps what the corruption is about. And by facing off with it and destroying it, you don't give in, and and then you're able to defeat the cell itself. Yeah.
Throw the ring into Mount Doom.
Yeah, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it reminds me of the saying, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And it seems like there was something about this magenta fluid that was almost like the superhero serum, or something that would potentially make you live longer and be stronger. And it seems like, especially from those little Goomba guys being in everything, that like all the bosses had some sort of access to something in this factory. And so I kind of imagine, okay, so if all the bosses were corrupted by this, if this is the corruption, then they were all seeking this power source, whatever it was. And if you had just sought it to cure yourself, maybe that's how it would begin, but then it would just corrupt you too, and you'd be another villain for someone else to need to deal with in the future.
And that's the sequel, is you don't destroy it and you get to run around killing people now. So
the sequel.
Hyper Light Drifter 2 on a rampage. Yeah, it's so affecting, because a couple things come to mind when you first arrive in that chamber and the demon creature manifests itself. It always slams you to the ground, right?
Yes.
And that's the way you begin every time you come back to face it.
Single time.
It throws you to the ground, and it's such and there's like just a small bass drop. It's so like, it's like the gauntlet dropping, right? And it's like, I have to beat this guy now because he keeps throwing me to the ground and I have to win. It's so affecting. And then of course, when you defeat it, the whole facility starts crumbling, and it's the classic, you got to get out of there before it's too late. But you are just constantly coughing up blood, and you are stopping.
Yeah.
And you're like, no,
and if
go,
you
man.
try to chain dash out of there,
you stop.
If you try to do anything, you stop more.
Right.
Yeah.
It just slows you down.
Any exertion. And that too is a really humbling and really like, expectation defying moment. You're like, I'm going to finally have defeated this, and then I'm going to escape. And then you're not allowed to. And it becomes, you kind of go back into that mental landscape where now you're huddled by the mythical fire as Anubis, the jackal, is watching. And then you see the ruins of the facility falling, around you. And then eyes are like peering out in the darkness.
That's my favorite scene. That scene is awesome.
Oh, it's so, you get chills just imagining what that would be like. And it's this incredible symbol of death itself, right? Like the fear of death, the loneliness of it, the eyes that are looking in, ready to devour you, and perhaps this hope as now this otherworldly being that stands, apart watching, will this being lead you to peace? Even though now you're in this situation where it's all out of your control.
Yeah.
And it was an interesting analogy for me for death also, because it was kind of this feeling of like, but wait, I won. But wait, I did so much good. But wait. And that's where it kind of hit me. We're like, yeah, everybody dies, you get to sit in the knowledge of the value, of your actions and who you were and what you did. I love that there's that kind of counter vision from the opening scene where there's just bloody water and bodies and all of that. And so you get this moment of seeing like blue water and blue sky. And so you get a
Yeah.
sense of the value that you've contributed, and that doesn't stop the ticking of time. That doesn't end the fact that we all die. So that was interesting to me, yeah, to begin with. And then I love, we've already started talking a little bit about Outer Wilds, which we absolutely need to talk about in length on this eventually. But I love that it ended around a campfire. And I also love that he wasn't alone. The jackal was there. I'm not talking about the other eyes. I wish he had been alone in that sense. but I love that he wasn't alone around the campfire.
It's funny. My thought in that moment, in that scene was I totally agree with you. Ending around a campfire, he's like succumbing to his wounds or whatever condition he's had. It's a tragic and yet beautiful scene at the same time.
Yeah.
But the one thing I thought about was, I think the Drifter, I think this entire time he was dying. You're coughing up blood during all this, and I couldn't help but think, and I think about Lord of the Rings all the time, so I'll find a way to apply that to anything. But I couldn't help but think of the moment where Frodo expresses to Gandalf, I wish this didn't happen to me. I wish the ring didn't come to me in my time. And he says, so do I, but so do all who, are in this moment. And all we have to do is to choose what we're going to do with the time given to us. And I kind of felt like there's a moment where he's dying beside that fire where you realize you made something of the time that was given to you. You didn't know how much time you had. And in the sense of a game, I mean, you kind of do, because like, oh, I'm going to beat all these things. And therefore, because the game can be beaten, I will survive at least to the end. But the reality is for all of us in real life, we don't know how much time we have. And so it kind of gives you a thought of, make use of the time that you have. And so there was a level of satisfaction in what you accomplished by defeating this guy. And so, yes, you're dying and succumbing to wounds or your illness by the campfire, not alone, but what you've done is very incredible. And so there is certainly a level of satisfaction, like you said, Justin. And so I don't know, that theme really sat with me. He might have been dying this whole time, and look what he still was able to.
Yeah. Let me share, I think, the most poignant thing that I experienced in this ending is a little bit of the mythology of Anubis, which I haven't heard covered in any podcasts that I listened to or watched.
Nothing.
And the idea of this Egyptian god is that it's the one that presides over the judgment of the dead, specifically weighing their hearts against a feather.
No way.
I did reading on that only because you told me to, right?
Oh my gosh. Well, when I realized that, I was like, okay.
Yeah.
Clearly this is intentional, right?
Yeah,
but I'm reminded of the words of Christ, the idea that what does it profit a man to gain the whole world yet forfeit his soul? And this seems to be the end of this game. You have the opportunity, perhaps, to be cured, and yet, gaining the whole world, you forfeit, the morality or your soul of that decision by embracing, that white diamond and the pink, fluid that could save you. Instead, by slaying it and by purifying the earth of its corruption, you succumb to your wounds, you die a natural death, and Anubis in this game weighs your heart. And that, I think, really comes through in the end, that even though you're haunted by all of these demons on the outskirts of the fire, just as Anubis led you on this quest, so too will he lead you from this moment, or she, I think it's personified as a female in the game, will lead you, home or to peace in some kind of afterlife. Mm. We hear this music too. It's just piano with a little bit of those electronic sounds and some pretty, crazy reverb happening in the background, but it's really different than the music of the game, and
Yeah.
in some ways represents this peace or this purification through um the return of some natural sound, you know, in the piano. And then, of course, we watch more or less a reverse of the cutscene
Right.
that started, specifically the lighting of those 4 power sources, and
Going
then this
out.
this crown, this strange holographic projection of what looks to be like a phoenix or a crown that sits over the city, and that fades away as now the power source has been deactivated. And so we're given like all of these symbols to think about, these visual metaphors to think about.
Yeah.
And, I just found that so gratifying and really calming to be like, wow, okay. And this good thing happened and that good thing happened.
Yeah, it was very satisfying. Yeah. Yeah, it's a poetic ending.
Yeah.
It really is. It was one of those ones where you felt like the Drifter's death had a lot of meaning. It wasn't just like, oh, you died. There was a lot loaded in that, and it all really culminates in that scene. It's a pretty weighted scene, even though it's kind of a shorter scene where you've seen him leaning against that campfire and succumbing to it. But it's cool.
Yeah, and I feel like this is another story that really honors supporting characters. Going back to the Lord of the Rings, some people could just pretty easily argue that Sam is the hero of that whole,
Sure.
trilogy.
Sure. Yeah.
When he's not at all the flashiest,
Mm.
But so there's that other drifter that we run into a couple of times.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
And that drifter is not the one that ends up defeating Judgment. He's not the one that ends up getting to the last place. But I love that we could not have done this without him. He saves us from that first kind of injury, gives us the map, gives us more information about a couple areas.
Yeah.
We could not have been the hero of the story without this other character that also fought the good fight, but then didn't get to see the culmination and the ultimate victory, but did everything in his power to do the right thing. And part of that was getting us to that last room. So
Yeah.
I'm always wondering, when I think the natural kind of egotistical assumption is that we're all the hero, we're all the main character, in our own lives and in the world to a certain extent. And so I always find a certain kind of value in trying to think about, okay, if I was the supporting character in the big story and in the story that mattered, what is something that I could do that would, push the boulder up the hill a little bit more, even if I don't get the, gold trophy, even if I don't get the final medal. Who can I help? How can I help? How can I
Yeah.
advance a cause, further than it was right now, even if I don't get to finally see it come to fruition.
Yeah. Yeah. I was pretty moved by the end of that mentor's story, because you meet him for the last time on your entrance into South.
Yeah.
And while you've met him at the beginning of each of the areas, and he slayed, entire groups, right? Swung his sword down, right? And, he just seems like a grizzled badass. And then you come to South and he's been mauled. He's been torn apart. And he tells you the end of his story, which is the beginning. Kind of how he ended up on this quest presumably when his wife and kid got sick or were slain. And he went out and sought, to defeat the corruption, which you can assume somehow was responsible for his family's death.
It played a part, no question.
Yeah, for the sickness that is in the land. And so in some ways, your character has no backstory, right? Like just shows up at a campfire and who knows where from. In some ways, that other drifter's story in some ways becomes your own, because now you're completing what they couldn't do.
Yeah, you're almost you're carrying the torch and finishing. It's almost like you're avenging their deaths in a way.
Yes,
you're doing what they could not. The other thing that we've talked about many times in prior games, Ryan, I know this has been a very important part of games to you when choosing them, is not having characters die for the sake of just having people die. Having meaning and purpose to death. And that's certainly been a theme throughout most of the games we've talked about. But even in the supporting character role. So if you look at this guy, that story moves you. And it's so funny to think about a game in that way for me. And just taking a high level step back, I'm, playing a game that maybe could be falling under the category of like pixel art. You know what I mean? Like it almost reminds me of like a Game Boy game. And here I am watching this guy mourn over, his family. And I'm just like, oh, that hits, and there's no words. That's another thing that's just really, really blown my mind, is how well the story is told without words. It was incredible use of visuals. But to tie it all together here, I was impressed at the use and the meaning of death throughout this game to propel you. So that last part where you learn about that drifter's, family's death, that hurt. That sucked. I didn't like seeing that. But that's also the very thing that kind of pushes you forward. Like, all right, it's time to kick this thing's ass. It's done enough. That you're seeing a guy who invariably would be, a strong badass, like you said, who has slain countless groups or people, and here he is, a broken man now, defeated. It's time to go whoop. Let's go take care of business. And so there's a moment of like feeling pumped up as you go through with it, but it's also, I don't know how else you can achieve a feeling like that without telling a story of loss and of death. And so it's a good use of it from a storytelling standpoint. There's a whole lot of weight and meaning to it. And I too, like you, enjoy a game that will honor death in that way, not just use it so carelessly or just to the
it explores the mythologies of death, right? And while some people may not put a lot of stock in any particular mythology, it speaks to kind of our need as a people to understand what death is and how we make sense of our meaningful lives in light of death's pervasiveness. And so, death isn't treated senselessly in this game, but is in fact steeped in abstract symbols and moments that carry the meaning of our character's journey always on the cusp of death. So I love that about this game, and I'm glad that in a game as violent as it is, right? This is like, John Wick with lightsabers,
Awesome.
But I'll tell you, like, this game resonates stronger than John Wick does because, John Wick's got to live so that we can make a sequel and make more money, right? And in some ways, this game tells a truer story because our character who lives by the sword also dies by it, right? It's his last act is one of violence and vengeance, but then he allows himself, he like succumbs. He's humbled by death itself. He's a harbinger of it, and he is then consumed by it. And we have to ask if there's any peace for a person like that,
Mm.
you know, who has been who you have played has been very violent throughout the whole game, you know, exacting vengeance on many, many, many creatures who have been wicked and evil.
It almost reminds me, I couldn't help but think about this, but Tombstone is one of my all-time favorite movies.
Yeah.
Doc Holliday is just like the ultimate badass in that film. And I couldn't help but think about him a little bit towards the end here. He gets sicker and sicker as the film goes on.
Yeah, you're right.
Shows up at the very end and just like makes Johnny Ringo crap his pants. And it kind of feels like a moment where you see a hero who is ill and using the time and skills that he has left to do something important. That was kind of a fun draw for me to just sort of think about the parallels with that. Not entirely the same, but you get the concept, you know.
Totally, yeah. No, but that's it exactly.
Yeah, you have somebody who is ailing, and at least in Tombstone, he's a very flawed man. But he is doing right by his friend and doing the right thing, you know, at the end of his life with what he has. And that's a very similar thing here at the very end.
Yeah. And our character, you know, like you said, Rye, doesn't have a backstory that's given to us. And so he was just a very blank slate. And what I put on that blank slate was like, oh, this is a really good guy that's setting out to do the right thing, you know. But I wonder if a better story is if
Do we know
he was at the end of his rope and he was not a good guy. And then he has this encounter with the jackal, you know, Anubis, and it kind of gives him a purpose. And he chooses his last days to matter, unlike the rest of his life. You know?
Yeah.
You don't know.
It is clear he's an outcast. That's probably the only piece we have. He's not a member of the town. Right. He's not a known entity. In fact, it's kind of clear the other drifter you meet in the town is, you know, shunned and beat up, you know, and is a beggar on the corner, right? Yeah.
And then gave up. You know, he's kind of a drunk, it seems like.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I do think that your character is like called by Anubis to rise and defeat the evil. And so, yeah, you are kind of acting as a kind of agent of a god of death or judgment, which is really interesting that the corruption, the black creature is called judgment, because I would think the drifter is the one enacting the judgment, right? Or Anubis, you know.
And hell's coming with me.
Yeah.
I'm your Huckleberry. Only I could have said that.
I think a lot about our society and the systems we create that are kind of larger than life, that hang over us like this immortal crown, you know, or this phoenix that promises us some kind of greater meaning than our lives have in and of themselves. And about how we find that very normal, you know, the powers of the internet, the ability to summon any good or service I need in 48 hours. Especially as we head into the holidays here, you know, super targets. Right. I just think that in some ways these attempts to kind of create an artificial brand of life or something that exists on the shoulders of robotic systems is kind of one of the things this game is speaking to abstractedly, right? And cautioning us to a kind of apocalypse that may result. I mean, this game doesn't really go into like why the apocalypse happened. It just kind of says that, well, if you have, you know, atomic bombs, you're going to blow up the world. If you have giant Titan machines, you're going to, you know, laser it to death.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I didn't, you know, it's sort of funny. This is one of the first games I felt like I didn't give as much thought to the world I was in.
Mm-hmm.
I sort of just accepted it. Usually I tend to think about, oh, why are they there? What happened? And I did to some extent have these thoughts. But like you, Justin, I think I felt myself more drawn to projecting what I thought the role of my character was. Did I show up in this from a very distant land? Is this like a country, like a confined space, or is this the whole world? You know what I mean? I kind of felt like I was spending more time wondering where my motives were on a lot of things, but it'd be worth probably sitting with the thought of, what is the background of the bigger world? How did they get in this mess? What can we take away from or consider from that? So maybe we don't do something similar. You know what I mean? Thinking through those thoughts and themes of how and where they got to the places that they're in, because there is a lot to be said. We've talked about that when we talked about Soma. What is the role of technology? What's the role of having our fingers, meddling with all these things? And intentions might be good to some extent, but things can go awry, and people are people, and you get tension and conflict that can erupt from those pieces. So there's probably a whole lot of other bigger thoughts that tend to go with that I just really didn't spend as much time thinking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like these games are encouraging me to work out a different set of muscles, because most of the video games that I've played or, still play in my free time are more like Fallout, where
Sure.
I can go talk to everybody and they have a lot to say, and I'm the kind of player that will have every possible conversation with people just because I'm curious about, sort of the writing and the vocal performance and everything, but then also the world, and I can get told about the world. And so this game and some of the others that we've been playing and played on the Story Geeks podcast are encouraging me to kind of infer and deduce and sort of fill in the blank with whatever I want to a certain extent, which which I'm not used to doing. I'm used to in games just being told,
tell me what it is.
Here's who this guy is, and then I can ask him like, why is he that way? How long has he been that way? What, and I don't have to fill in the blanks. I'm just told. So yeah.
It is an important thing with the games I recommend, right, that we have a poetic experience through the game. Yeah. And a good wine would have a kind of poetry to the taste of it, right? A kind of a story in the taste. And that's what I think these games so far have in common, for as different as they all are. Yeah. They give us, they do stretch those muscles that a lot of just mainstream games aren't willing to stretch, because they don't sell that well or review as well, right? As Hyper Light Drifter was marked down for not, telling us more. It's like, gosh, what do you need, man? This is poetry. Don't get mad at poetry for not giving you an answer key.
Yeah. I think a lot of people don't. We live in a culture where things are fast, very fast. And it's easy to have things told to us or delivered to us or given to us. And oftentimes, I don't think a lot of people want to stop and take the time to do the mental legwork and think about that stuff. I would rather just do the Cliff Notes version. Just tell me what it is so I can hop on to the next thing. And if you're not going to do that, I'll mark it down as a
And therein lies the problem, right? Yeah. They tell you the world, and then you go on to the next thing. And what I find interesting about all of these games, at least in my own experience, is that they have stuck with me for years. And by playing them, the metaphors, the poetry of the game has taught me something about life that I've carried with me. And sometimes I've taken a break from playing games after doing some of these because they were such rich experiences. I was like, I don't want to I don't want to go to another experience that's going to be subpar.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many games like Hyper Light Drifter. There's so many games. I mean, just think Dead Cells is a recent example. It's a pixel hack and slash game, that goes through, procedurally generated regions or secrets to explore. And there's some kind of, metaphor going on about, existence and cells and stuff. But honestly, it's downstream from Hyper Light Drifter. Hyper Light Drifter said it better with a developer that had the story. And it's like, why would we remake that? And that's unfortunately, playing these games. Yeah, here it is. The spoiler warning, the real spoiler warning will spoil you for other games because you're going to be like, I can't, it's like,
Well,
I tasted the good stuff. Now I can't go back to the $2 check.
Right. I remember I saw Schindler's List, the film Schindler's List in high school or something for a history class, and then I rewatched it as an adult later. And I had that feeling of like, why would I watch a comedy after this? Why would I watch something else that doesn't matter as much as this? And so I feel like that's not the intention of the movie to like make you elitist or
ruin everything else.
like ruin
Right.
everything else for you. But I feel like that's an earmark of great art where it fills you up so much and gives you such a rich experience and teaches you something about life and humanity and yourself and truth and all these different things, and some other things start to feel like counterfeit and just a waste of time.
Yeah.
And so one of the games that I'm playing right now is the new Avengers game, and it is very shallow. It is superheroes punching robots, and
Bad guy, go beat him.
it's really fun, but it has no nuance, and nothing that we could take an hour talk. I mean, actually, there is one character we could probably take an hour talking about, but it's a nice diversion. It's a nice way to relax. But I look forward to the games that we play and talk about completely differently than some of the other experiences I have. So I think I am slowly acquiring the taste and slowly refining my palate.
That's how we do it.
I think to piggyback on that, there's different games for different times and places. Similar to movies, right? Like you said, you'll watch a really great film. Like you'll watch Die Hard and say, that's the perfect film. There's no other film that measures up. Or Face Off, for example, that's another perfect film.
Face Off.
No, but what I find is anytime I have seen a movie like a movie that has just really impacted me, I will sit with it and think about it. It will take over my mind for days, possibly weeks. It will be something that I will read about. It'll be something that I'll Google or get on Reddit and want to talk about, or call people and actually discuss it. But then certainly I crave other movie experiences. But then there's moments where I feel like I just want a comedy. I want something light. I need something light, and I think that's certainly okay to have those gaming experiences. So, for example, I busted out my old pack of old video games, and I found one of the most mindless video games that I got so good at. It was called MX Unleashed because I used to ride dirt bikes with my dad way back in the day. So I was super into this game, and this was before you could play online, and I would whoop people's butts with this. If I could have played online, I probably would have been good. Not the best. There's always someone better than you. But it was one of those experiences. I played it very recently within the last week or so, and it just brought so much nostalgia with it. There is literally no depth to it. It's not even a well-made game, but I remember killing hours playing it, and at the time, it was sort of a stress reliever. You know what I mean? Like certain games can fill certain things that you need, and I think that's totally okay. But I do think there's something to be said for finding games like these that are very, very rich, that will give you moments to pause and think deeply about things. I would never think about anything deeply while playing MX Unleashed. My goodness.
Yeah.
Well, it's like thinking that all alcohol is Budweiser beer, right?
Right.
It's like, that's such a shame.
Whereas I'm drinking the Stone Brewery Enjoy by January 1st, 2021 unfiltered IPA, which is
There
not
you go.
at all Budweiser. I mean, okay, so now 3 thoughts. Ryan, we had your bachelor party at Stone Brewery. I was just watching some footage that I found from that.
Whoa.
So I'll need to get that forward to you eventually. But we're talking sommelier language, so different drinks. But I feel like another analogy is just food. The difference between an excellent steak, versus a McDonald's hamburger. One is easier, cheaper, more readily accessible, but it just doesn't compare.
Yeah.
Shoot, what was there was another thing that will come back to me. I got so distracted by the memories.
Exercise is another, example of this, right? It takes a little bit of time to get our bodies acclimated to the act of doing it. But once we are, we find that we prefer fitness over, ill fitness. Just as if we are, taking care, well, maybe for you.
I really love back.
If we're being conscious of our diet as well, we're thinking through things. We're not just going with the impulse or with our appetites, right?
Yeah.
And that's why it's important to play games like this, even if they're challenging and not like especially fun or games you want to unwind with. They are games that just subtly uplift the palate, which then helps, when it's like, I've been playing hours of this kind of, silly game, and I'm not as appetized by that anymore. I had my fun, and now I can, put it down. But I think it's very easy for us to get kind of addicted where, at least this is my own experience. It's just, it can be easy to just go from one game to the next and always just chain them up and be kind of very consumptive, like continuing to eat fries, Yeah. And these games, and especially this context here, talking about it, interacting with people playing the same games and having like life level conversations about it, just gets me to like stop, disengage from the games and engage more in the, act of living around them.
Well, and if it weren't for talking with y'all, I probably wouldn't go near to the level. I wouldn't be getting as much as I'm getting out of it right now without talking about it with people.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, if I were to do it, I can read about it and, put some thought to it, but I don't always see everything that you guys see. And I think that's part of the beauty of, it's the same with like a book club or, with any kind of conversation. You get other people's perspectives and experiences with it. Now you're talking about stuff that's much deeper than just, beating a bad guy up or, how'd you do this puzzle, kind of a thing. You're actually talking about things that are beyond just literally playing the game. You're diving into themes and thoughts and things that are much, much bigger and richer. And so I think there is a lacking in the sense of, I don't know how many people spend the time to do that because there's so much to take away from it. And that's what I've taken away from this is, man, these experiences playing these games have been way more enriched being able to talk to people about them versus just kind of going through them. And yeah, that was fun, but I don't give thought to it like I would otherwise. Every game that we have played so far, even going back to when you guys were doing your Story Geeks one, I can pick apart very specific things that will sit with me that I've never had for other games. And these are much smaller scale games. Things that Untitled Goose Game, like my goodness, that would have been probably a forgetful experience if not for having the conversation. So I think there's a lot that we need to consider, and other people that are listening or watching, put the thought into it. Put the lenses on and dive into it, lean into it, because gosh,
well, join us. Join us. We're here. We're doing it. Do it with us.
Yeah. And I think that the biggest thing I want out of this in 2021 is just to get more people to join us in the playing and the conversation, because, I love hearing your guys' insights. And just like you were saying, Jimmy, you guys have different insights and thoughts than I do. And I'm made better by being in conversation with you guys. And so I look forward to adding more people to these conversations and just making it that much richer and deeper and more diverse.
We're definitely not going to get there by doing the easiest, games to get into. In fact, our next game, oh man, here we go, is Everybody's Gone to the Rapture.
Everybody's Gone to the Rapture.
So if you were with us back when we did Edith Finch, this was actually the first time the three of us got to talk about games back in the Story Geeks podcast. We covered that walking simulator. Well, Edith Finch probably did it best in terms of like the variety of experience and just a very engaging story, and like all those control schemes and stuff, just really fun to play. And Everybody's Gone to the Rapture is like not fun to play in the same way.
This is a hype video.
Yeah, I'm really hyping this up. So it's very much it's an acquired taste kind of game. But if you liken it instead to going to a museum, right? You're walking into an experience, okay, this is going to be a little more higher brow. I need to like be not so interested in, running in the halls and be a little bit more attentive. What you'll find is this immaculately designed countryside of like England in the 80s. And you are walking through this space that has been deserted inexplicably. And all of these like emergency broadcasts are replaying around you. And then you encounter these strange, luminescent memories of people who had walked or talked in these townscapes, and they're almost like playing back like a recording that you stumble across, and you slowly piece together what happened to this like sleepy English town. But it's like a very British game, so you got to kind of turn on that part of your brain, and then yeah, exactly. You also have to be ready to like to connect some dots, So I encourage you to play with the subtitles on and to be like jotting down notes. Yeah. It's it's one of the most moving games I've ever played. But some people got through it and they were like, I didn't get it. And I think if you just let yourself sit with this game and think about it and engage with the characters, the story is incredibly immersive, and it's one of the most beautiful games I've ever played in terms of its graphical style and its attention to detail. So
yeah, if anybody's watching, if you're less into walking simulators, that's me. I did not feel hyped up to play Edith Finch, and that was the game that I joined y'all on the Story Geeks podcast with. Edith Finch is now one of my favorite games. That was such a cool experience. Go into a game like this with an open mind, and like I said, lean into it, because it was fantastic. So I'm excited to go through this. Walking simulators traditionally don't excite me. Well, just because I like doing things like,
Yeah.
I'm slashing a sword, I'm collecting this, or I'm solving, I'm tinkering, versus just like discovering and talking, or viewing on like a passive side.
Yeah.
Being said, I have learned to understand the power of that, because that means the strength of this game is probably going to be its storytelling, and when you have that as a strength, you got a really good game coming your way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
Rye, I appreciated the idea of taking notes. I think you had told me that if you put the subtitles on, that's the only way you can be sure who's talking, right?
Well, I mean, unless you can remember their voices,
Yeah.
and that
But
it's
it'll give
so
you the character
disorienting.
name.
Yeah. I
And
just think,
that was helpful for me to think about when I'm heading
yeah,
into this game.
it is a game that does help to have a little bit of preparation going into it. It's like, imagine being dropped off at a museum and you don't know whether you're about to see Renaissance art or abstract,
Yeah.
Yeah. So it does help. They did model this idea of an apocalypse from a kind of traditional English sentiment. This idea of a cozy catastrophe.
Huh.
How does the apocalypse look like when you're a sleepy English farm town?
Not a bustling New York City where,
Yeah, not at the front lines. This isn't Independence Day.
Right.
dang it.
Right. There aren't helicopters crashing. There aren't, planes and cars and, all the action and all that. It's just
It's
people
like a
were sitting
very
on a bench and now they're not.
ordinary
Guys are hyping this so
yeah,
strong.
that's so great. It's a very ordinary story told in an extraordinary circumstance, which in that sense makes it much more relatable than most games, which, put you in the shoes of the superhero. This puts you in the shoes of, okay, well, this would probably be me, right? I'd be that, that idiot that can't figure out what to do. Anyway, I'm not going to say much more, but obviously there's these mythological components to it, and we'll get to talk about all of that. The developers themselves are very fascinating creators, a husband and wife team, and they employed a very talented staff for this game, and really put their heart and souls into it, and it comes through not only in the visuals but also in the music, which is this gorgeous traditional requiem. And it actually won awards. It was published through Sony, and it won like awards in there for best classical release in the year it came out. So yeah, enjoy.
Knowing that we are going to play about half of it before our next conversation, is there kind of a point that you would recommend getting to, or a milestone, or is it not that kind of game?
So the game probably takes somewhere between 2.5 to 5 hours to play through. Yeah, it's really interesting. It's a lot like Edith Finch, but it's way more open-ended. You're going to feel like you're missing stuff, and in some cases you might be.
Okay.
And that's a bad feeling, right?
Yeah.
No, I don't want to miss anything. But if you're trying to find everything, you end up just walking around a lot. In fact, the game was dinged for not having a sufficient run mechanic.
Oh.
So the pace quite literally is slow.
It is. It's very slow paced. Yeah, that's exactly right. There so the story kind of exists in 5 regions of the main map, which are then given a name of one of the leading characters.
Okay.
And so I don't know. I mean, let's make sure we play through at least 2 of those, though. Let's see if you can get a little further too, like maybe 3 or 4. There's a ton to talk about in this game. There is so much to talk about in this game, and I've done a lot of thinking on it. So I may even plan on doing some preparatory podcasts just to just to talk through some of these observations in advance so that we have a leg up when we meet, instead of having a conversation is like, I didn't get who Giles was until, an hour in. And then I was like, I don't know what he was doing that whole time. And I can't go back and replay those. Anyway, we could have a lot of conversation like that, or
Okay.
we could be talking about, the actual events and characters and their relations. But a lot of that just comes at your own pace and discovery. And eventually, the story, it's like watching great theater. It eventually the story just kind of lands in that emotional place and takes you in. So anyway,
Great.
yeah,
great,
Awesome.
If it's
Cool.
if it's 2.5 to 5 hours, I feel like I'll probably beat it before our first conversation.
Yeah, and you'd be welcome to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Great.
probably won't. I tend to be much slower, but I have my goal. I have my goals now.
Just remember in this game to upgrade your sword to do the spinning.
Yes. Start with that.
That kind of game.
I'm I'm excited. This will be a nice change of pace for us. This is really good.
Yeah. Ryan, do you want to share any other games that you've kind of earmarked, or do we want to keep revealing month to month?
We may need to reveal month to month, but I don't know, a couple things on our list. I mean, hey, if this is an incentive for anyone listening to chime in with what they think is their indie gem or their favorite game of the last decade,
great,
throw it in the pot. I've got a few ideas. We need to cover a Supergiant game. Supergiant's a developer. They did Bastion, they did Transistor and Pyre, and most recently Hades. And their games are immaculate. They're incredible, all of them. But being the sci-fi nerd that I am, I do like Transistor. I think it's a really tight and interesting experience. It's kind of a mixture of a turn-based hack and slash, RPG game with this incredibly stylistic story and wonderful music. So Transistor is the name of that game.
Okay.
I think we need to play an open world crafting game like Subnautica.
Cool.
You guys are going to love that game, especially Jimmy.
I love the open world. One day, my request, and Justin, you mentioned earlier, I would love to do an Outer Wilds discussion.
Yeah. Yes. Retrospection.
I'm guessing Subnautica slightly fits the bill with that in the open world exploratory sense.
Yeah.
That's very much an excitement for me.
Subnautica takes place in the ocean.
Better.
Which is why I know you'll love it.
There's an anglerfish, I will quit this thing so fast. I'm just kidding.
We need to do Hellblade.
Yeah.
Which is
sacrifice.
It's another incredible, like, photorealistic indie game that explores mental illness.
Oh wow.
But in, of course, a Viking fantasy world. So it's
absolutely
what better place to explore?
And then, Rye, one of the games that I feel like started this entire journey for me is Braid.
Yeah.
And I know that that's being remastered sometime this year, so I feel like we might need to work that in.
And I have never played Braid. And I know the impact that has had on you and many, many others.
Yeah. Braid really kicked off the indie game thing. It was came out on Xbox Live Arcade, back in 2008. So it's quite old now, but as games go, but it's really great. We definitely need to go back and do a retrospective on that at least. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, maybe that'll be a one-off, but but I'm excited to see what it'll look like remastered and what special features they'll have in that and all of that.
Lasers. Lots of lasers.
Awesome. Well, 2021 holds a lot for us to be excited about.
Yeah.
So I'm excited for the various stories and journeys and experiences and conversations that we will have together here.
Here we go.
Yeah. Well,
All
hey,
right.
Cheers to you guys.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Cheers.
Cheers to us and the end of this first 3 months. And here's to the beginning of a new year with Videogame Sommelier. All right.
Rock and roll.
We'll see you guys
Peace.
next year.
Adios.